All right. I don't know if any of you have been watching the news this last week, but it's almost been wall-to-wall coverage of a tragic event that happened in Minneapolis, St. Paul, almost a year ago, when George Floyd lost his life, and the officer that was part of that is on trial for what happened that day. I've been interested this last week to pick up the news at the end of the day and kind of summary of what's happened. And I found it interesting that person after person that was brought in front of the court, in front of the jury, told their eyewitness account of what they saw on that particular day. And it carries a lot of weight. Now, fortunately, there's also video, which helps clarify, but it's still the eyewitness accounts that are really, really important to get to the truth of what really happened on that day. Now, the reason I tell you that is several months ago, we began as a church family to think through what did the eyewitnesses around Jesus' life. It was only, like, publicly, he was only ministering, I guess you could say, for like 3 years or so. And so there isn't a lot, I guess, of eyewitness testimony. We can't bring anybody here, like, present today to ask them questions and find out what happened. But we are so privileged that at least 4 eyewitnesses to his life, 3 plus a guy by the name of Luke who investigated it, and he talked to some of the eyewitnesses, have told their story of Jesus and what happened in the 3 years that he was, as an adult, caring for and ministering in the world around him. And so we decided several months ago that we would take one of them, the earliest one and the shortest one, that was written by a guy by the name of Mark, which he probably was the steno or the administrative assistant to the guy who actually saw it all, which was Peter. And he records Peter's story for us. And so we've been thinking through the last months, what really happened? What went on? What did Jesus say? And what does it mean? What are the places that he visited? And when he was there, what did he do? And are there implications for that? Well, Mark and Peter record 16 chapters altogether. You can take a look at it in your own Bible. It's under the Gospel of Mark, or the Good News of Mark. It's 16 chapters. 10 of those chapters, Mark and Peter are simply telling us the stories of Jesus' life to try to, it appears, prove to us that Jesus was no ordinary guy. He wasn't just another human being with a charismatic story or a dynamic testimony. No, the things that he did, the way that it's recorded, would cause one to come to the conclusion he was somebody divine. And that's what Mark and Peter are trying to do. And then they get to the 10th chapter and they slow walk us through the last 8 days of Jesus' life. And if you've been hanging around Copper Hills or tuning in, you know that we're at the stage now, as we slow walk through this, to the Easter celebration of what happened. And so I want to take a look at that with you and see what we can learn from this. So we're going to pick it up on actually Saturday night. This is where this text, if you want to follow along, you sure can. It's Mark chapter 16, verse 1. But I'm going to pick it up on Saturday night. By now, Jesus has been in the tomb about 24 hours or so, something like that. It's a tomb that's been cut out of a rock hillside in all likelihood, a cave, if you will. And this is where Jesus' body has hastily been placed. Now, you have to understand, this is the people involved in this are all from a Jewish culture, a Jewish faith, and there are proper ways that you inter a body. There's certain ways that you prepare it for burial, and that hadn't happened for Jesus. And his friends are really concerned about it because there really is an appropriate way. And you would think they could have done it the next day on Saturday, but they couldn't because that was the Sabbath, and that was the day they couldn't do any work as part of their Jewish faith expression. And so it appears that what happens, as soon as sundown on Saturday happens and the Sabbath is over, something can change, something can happen that couldn't happen up to this point. So on Friday, Jesus is declared dead. His body is put in a tomb. Jesus is so poor, he doesn't have his own tomb. A rich guy by the name of Joseph from a small town of Arimathea, just north and west of Jerusalem, gives up his tomb for this purpose, and he and a friend put Jesus in there. And now it's the next day, and Jesus' friends are going to take care of what they couldn't do so far. We read this in Mark 16, verse 1. It says, Saturday evening, when the Sabbath ended, 3 ladies, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome, went out and purchased burial spices so that they could anoint Jesus' body. So as soon as the sun sets, probably around 7 o'clock or so on Saturday night, these 3 ladies go to some local establishments, a spice merchant of some kind. They would have bought about 75 pounds worth of spices, and they find a linen merchant who got about 100 feet of linen that they would have used to put, first of all, the spices on Jesus' body and then wrap the cloth around Jesus' body. And this is what they're going to do. It's now dark, however, and they can't exactly find, there weren't streetlights, right? So they can't probably find their way safely to the tomb. They decide we're going to do it the next morning, Sunday morning. We'll get up bright and early, and we're going to go do what we weren't able to do. It's really important that we do this the right way. So this is what their plan is. Now, I'm going to stop here for just a second. And to me, it's interesting through the ages how proper burial of the human body is so important across cultures, across time. It's just somehow really significant. It's like we have this kind of innate idea, like a sixth sense, that our species, the human beings, when they die, this isn't the end of life. That there's something else beyond that. That the lights don't simply go out and we cease to exist. There's some sense that we are going to spend way more time in the life after this life than this life. That is why in most cultures, you can see over and over again the costly and stunning construction projects that are put up for wealthy, powerful people who get ushered into the next life. I'll give you a few examples. Here's one from Egypt. This is the pyramid complex in Giza, Egypt. This was built by Pharaoh Khufu about 3,400 years ago, something like that. And he was concerned about his afterlife, and so he wanted to preserve his body, and he built this magnificent complex of these pyramids. This particular one is about 480 feet tall. It's almost half a mile in circumference. It's one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world. Over 20,000 people worked 20 years to build that. And inside it is his burial place, which really was preparation to preserve his body because he was going to need it again. Here's another one. This is one of the most famous buildings in all of India. Some of you may have visited it. It's the Taj Mahal. It's actually a tribute by an Indian emperor to his wife who died giving birth to their 14th child. Poor girl, right? She needs a monument. She really does. But this is what he builds for himself and for his wife. So she's interred there first of all, and a few years later he is. And that's where their bodies still are. Here's another one. This is the terracotta warrior tomb constructed by a Chinese emperor some 300 years before Jesus' life here on earth. It was discovered really recently, actually. It was discovered in 1974 when 2 farmers were digging in their field, and they discovered this huge cavern. And as it was explored, this is just one of 300 vaults like this. They're not all that same size. There are 8,000 handcrafted stone warriors, each individually unique in their own way, covered with terracotta. The entrance to this is covered in pearls to simulate what the glory of the next life would be. There's every kind of food that was put into this complex, and none of it survived except like a package of Twinkies, right, which like survives anything, right? 720,000 workers built this. Why? Because this emperor was absolutely convinced that life on earth was shorter than life forever, and he wanted to be prepared for that. But the most important tomb in human history, a tomb that stands alone in its renown, a tomb that dwarfs every other tomb, regardless of what you think about God or any other person, one tomb. But you see, it's not famous for who's in it. It's famous for who's not in it, because it's empty. Nobody except God knows exactly for sure where that tomb is located. It might have been just outside the walls of the old city of Jerusalem. That's kind of the traditional spot. But wherever it is, it's not very far from this particular site. It's an interesting story, our story of faith, if you're a follower of Jesus. It's fascinating to think of a tomb being empty and the claim being that the body wasn't stolen, but it somehow came back to life again. It's really quite a story, but if it's just a story, it's just a story. But if it's real, oh my goodness, the implications of that are huge for us. So let's go back to our story. Verse 2 of Mark chapter 16, it says, very early on Sunday morning, just at sunrise, they went to the tomb. I got a question for you. It's just one of those curiosity things for me. What time during the night do you think Jesus came back to life? Do you think it was when the sun rose? I think like as soon as it hit midnight, he was alive. Could not wait for the implications to take place on planet Earth. I have no idea. We'll ask him one day, right? So here in this story, at this point, for all we know, these three women, for all they know, they're the only ones left. Because there's this concern, because Jesus' life is taken out by the Roman officials and the religious leaders of the day, how many others have been taken out? Have they been together? Do they know whether the others are in jail? Who's still part of it? Who's still alive? And so possibly these three ladies think they're the only ones that are still around. And in the early mornings, they go to a graveyard to embalm their dead friend's body. Verse 3 says, on the way, they were asking each other, who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb? Should have thought of that earlier. Right? Should have, but they didn't. Why? Because you don't think about that stuff when you're grieving. You don't. Your mind's on other things. And so they set out for this tomb, and they don't know exactly how they're going to roll it back. You see, on Friday night, Jesus' lifeless body is put in this tomb. It's closed up with a round stone. It's sealed with an official government seal. Plus, because of a concern that Jesus' friends might actually come and take his body, a Roman detachment of guards are placed and stationed in front of it. So, of course, they've got a dilemma. How are they going to roll it back? But there's actually a bigger question. Why go? Why take the risk? Why bother? There's no way to remove the heavy stones. Why do this? But there's a risk involved with it. And besides, it's over, right? They are not expecting an empty tomb. They're not. I think it was love that probably did that. My dad passed away a week ago, Friday. He lived in Canada. And because of COVID and the Canadian restrictions are much more robust than ours, shall we say. I haven't been able to go back for my dad's funeral memorial yet. And I'm so eager to do that. He's not there. So I'm not going to see him. But it's what love does, right? I want to go back to be with my mom and my sister and my family and celebrate my dad. You get it, right? These gals are probably the same. They just want to be close. They want to be near. His body's in there. That's the closest they can get to it. And maybe they'll be able to roll the stone back. Maybe they won't, but they're going because they love him. It wasn't hope that he would be alive. It wasn't hope that the tomb would be empty. No. It's just the power of love. And this is why they go. And there's good news when they get there. Verse 4 says, but as they arrived, they looked and they saw the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled away. We're told in another eyewitness account of these events that at some point in the early morning hours, a localized earthquake shook the ground and the sealed stone rolled back from the entrance. Who would have ever expected that? The guards that are stationed there were told they passed out and fell to the ground as though they were dead. We have to notice the irony of how this story is told. The guards who are supposed to be alive and aware are like dead guys, and the guy who's supposed to be dead is a live guy. You get the irony of that? How interesting. God has such a sense of humor. After the guards come to and they awake, they realize the tomb is open, and they look to see that it's empty, and they head back to headquarters to figure this out, to see how they can dodge the consequences of this. Verse 5 says, when they, that's the three women, entered the tomb, they saw a young man clothed in a white robe sitting on the right side. The women were shocked. Now, this won't matter to you, but I find it interesting. This is the only place in the entire New Testament where this word shows up. They were shocked because this had never happened before. No wonder. How do you respond? You respond uniquely. They were awestruck, astonished. And it's happening right now. It's just this overwhelming sense of no way. But the angel, and now it must be an angel of God, says, hey, girls, don't be alarmed. You're looking for Jesus who was crucified. And they enter the tomb and they're shocked and awestruck. They're astonished with the reality they cannot absorb. They're invited into the tomb by the angel, and we quickly find out that it's not the presence of the angel that has rattled them. It is this. And it is the central theme of the entire Bible. The entire Bible. Dramatized in Jesus' life and his death, they hear the most important sentence that's ever been uttered in human history. They tremble with terror and confusion and grief as they go into the tomb, and then they hear it. He is not here. He is risen from the dead. Unexpected, profound, amazing, and here's our problem. We knew what they were going to be, what they would hear. We've read the story so often. We've heard it year after year. It's not new to us anymore. But to them, can you imagine? Can you try to put yourself in that spot that this is what they hear? It's the most profound statement ever. It's the culmination of all the Old Testament predictions. Everything from creation had pointed to this. And all of our hopes, if you have hope for eternity, are based on that sentence. He is not here. He has risen from the dead. Death could not hold him. The grave has been denied. Hell could not defeat him. Hate could not overcome him. This was the sentence that changed everything. On a day very much like today, in a country, on a plot of land that still exists today, these simple words changed the world and eternity. You see, everything else in the world was just as it was the day before. Caesar was still on the throne in Rome. Pilate was still washing his hands of the whole deal. The Jewish religious leaders are still protecting their power. The disciples are somewhere trying to hide and protect their lives. The crowds are still disbelieving. Another bogus Messiah has been exposed. The soldiers are still celebrating another successful execution, but one thing is different. He is not here. He has risen from the dead. The angel does not say this. It's okay. He'll live on in your hearts. It's going to be all right. Be present. He'll be present in your thoughts. Oh, let's not forget, he was a good man. We'll keep his memory alive and carry on with his cause. They don't say that. Not a chance. The angel is more aware that the place where they stood was a place of death, finality, discouragement, grief, sorrow, collapse, failure, disillusion, except for one thing. He is not here. He has risen from the dead. That is what has changed this. Everything is the same as it was except for one thing, and that one thing changes everything. So, girls, do not give up hope. Do not be in despair. Do not be discouraged. You don't have to be afraid. And now this is not just for them, but it's for us. Afraid of what? Afraid of anything. Problems, death, destruction, health problems, money problems, viruses, vaccinations, bad jobs, no jobs, bad marriage, no marriage, bad dates, no dates, bad hair, no hair. Doesn't matter. He is not here. He has risen from the dead. And if you need some more evidence, girls, here it is. The verse goes on to say he's not here, he's risen from the dead. Look, this is where he laid his body. His body was here, but it isn't here anymore, and that means that he isn't here. You have no need to be here either, so drop your spices and linen and go. Verse 7 says, now go and tell his disciples, including Peter. If it had been me, I would have written this a little bit different. If it's me, communicating as Jesus, I would have said, okay, so you guys go do what you want. I'm going to go visit Pilate. So Pilate, you want to know what truth is? Standing in front of you. I would have wanted to go to the religious leaders and go, so, who's in control? Wouldn't you? But Jesus doesn't do that. He goes and he says, like, go tell Peter. He's going to hook up with them later, but at this point, go tell Peter. And this is what Jesus wants to tell Peter, right? Peter, I am so disappointed in you. You had your moment. On a global stage in the courtyard of Caiaphas, you could have stood up. You could have said something. Oh, Peter, you missed it. I actually don't want to see you again, Peter. I'm sending the girls to talk to you because I don't actually want to see you, Peter. And you can tell the rest as well that I noticed their betrayal, their denial, their desertion, and I'm not okay with it. I'm moving on to people who will be loyal and faithful and not always question me. And when you see them, you can go remind them of all that I've done for them, that I plucked them out of obscurity in a small backwater town of Capernaum, and I put them on a historic world stage, but did that matter to them? No, at the critical time, they gave up on me. So why don't you just go tell Peter and the guys this. Of course he doesn't do that. No, actually, for the very first time, Matthew records, when he records this story, for the very first time, Jesus refers to his disciples as his brothers. Who does that? When is the last time someone profoundly disappointed you, let you down, betrayed you, did whatever they did to you, and your first inclination is to go, you used to be friends, used to be my disciples, but now we're brothers and sisters. Who does that? I guess a resurrected Savior does that. So then go tell Peter and my brothers what? Well, tell them that Jesus is going ahead of you to Galilee. You'll see him there just as he told you before he died. In other words, I'm going to meet up with you in the old neighborhood. I want to meet up with you again where we first met and we forged this amazing friendship that we had. I want to meet you there where we had these incredible personal experiences, a location filled with great memories, where we saw God, which is me, do great things. Remember the day that 18,000 people were fed with a little bit of bread and some fish? Remember that day? We're going back there. Remember the day when a little innocent child who somehow had gotten involved in occultic stuff and throws himself into fire and it's just terrible stuff. And you were there when we freed him from that. Let's go back there where we saw God do great things, where sick people were healed. And Peter, let's go back where you walked on the water. Let's do that. I want to meet up where it all started 3 years ago. You see, girls, you can't stay here in the tomb. You have to go. The tomb is empty. And that has implications for the whole world, so let's go. So if you want to see him, you can't stay here. You're going to need to go. So the women in verse 8 says, they fled the tomb, trembling and bewildered. Of course they were. They said nothing to anyone because they were too frightened. And then they briefly reported all this to Peter and his companions. And Jesus' friends believe, and they tell the world of their 3-year encounter with Jesus, just like we're doing today. For 3 evenings this week, we turned our campus into kind of a sound stage, if you will, an Easter sound stage. As many of you participated and walked through our campus with your families and saw the various scenes from the Easter story. I had the privilege of walking through on Monday night with my grandchildren, and that's just such a privilege to do that. At one point along the way, my little 4-year-old grandson, Joshua, tugged on my hand and looked up at me with big eyes, a shocked look in his face, and he says, "Grandpa." I go, "Yeah, Josh?" "I didn't know Jesus was really real." You see, he got something. He got something that a 4-year-old little boy can understand, and the smartest people in the world cannot fully grasp and understand. He got this, that Jesus is not like Santa. He's not like the Easter Bunny. He's really real. And this is the story that these three ladies grasp and understand. And as they talk about it and others observe and others see themselves, they find out just how real. And something changed for my little grandson on Monday night. It did. Something changed for him. And this is the uniqueness of Easter. Everything is just the same when you walked in here tonight. See, your boss is just as demanding as he was when you walked out of the office on Friday. Your spouse is just as imperfect. Your family is just as dysfunctional. The diagnosis is still the same. The money that you want isn't in your bank account yet. The chair around your table is empty still. The runaway child is not home yet. But everything is different. Because he is not here. He is alive. See, that changes everything. Because he's alive, we can face whatever suffering comes our way. Because he's alive, we can face things like disability and viruses. And we don't really have to be afraid. Because he's alive, we can do the right thing, even if it costs us our reputation and maybe even our lives. But if he's not alive, there is no hope. You see, he wants you and I to have forgiveness through his death on a wooden cross and hope through his resurrected life from an empty tomb. And because he is alive, and because he left the tomb, do you know where he can live now? He can live inside of us. He can bring us spiritual life. Because of his death, we can be spiritually alive. But you know, just like he deals with Peter, doesn't do the intuitive thing of correct him and shame him and, coerce him into coming clean and fessing up all his stuff and somehow in the shame finding forgiveness. Jesus has forgiven him long in advance. Peter will just have to accept that. He'll just have to receive that. And this is how he approaches us as well. He doesn't make us believe that he's alive. You can go your whole life and say that's not the case. He wouldn't want it. You see, this is the offer that's on the table. He goes to a cross, the King of the universe, the God who was there at creation, willfully by his choice, out of love for us, gives his life on a cross so that you and I don't ever have to go there, though we deserve it. And if that's where it ends, it ends. But it's because he's alive that he can now live inside of you and me, and this is his offer to do so. Do you know him that way? Would this be the weekend that possibly you would say, like my 4-year-old grandson, I didn't know he was really real. He's really real. But he'll let us go throughout our whole lives, assuming of him whatever we want to assume. But make no mistake, he will do his level best to convince us that he is the author of life, the Savior of the world, the Redeemer of all mankind, the forgiver of every sin, the giver of spiritual life. And we all get to make a choice. What's your choice? What would you choose? What have you chosen? Choose him. He is not here. He is risen from the dead. Jesus, we address you not as a dead hero. We address you as the living Savior. The tomb is empty. Not because that's a feel-good story or it's a great way to end a dramatic experience in life. No, it's because the tomb is really empty and you are alive. We're grateful for what you did, and those are words that are just too simple for it, for what really happened. Thanks for leaving the choice with us, but making the choice clear. Jesus, would it be that all of us on this Easter, all of us, would weigh out who you are, what you've done, the emptiness of the tomb, and say yes to you, that we want you to live inside of us, to live in us, and form us more closely into someone who intuitively thinks like you about all of life. We love you back, Jesus.